So I labeled this conversation accessibility for humans, and I'm really being intentional with that because I think oftentimes it's interesting for us. Many of us have had theological degrees, have been to secondary and perhaps even a post secondary educational experience. Um, we're used to, whether we recognize it or not, being in spaces where we may know something more about someone else than they may know. So, particularly like the theological sort of arena, which, everybody in the United States goes to theological school, right? No, it was a joke. But we may be in spaces where, whether it's a church, whether it's a small group setting or something like that, where we're teaching about something that a lot of folks don't know about. And so it might seem very experienced for us and experienced for someone else. But that word, it's we know more of the technical details about that particular domain, and someone else may not. It's interesting to me how we sort of negotiate that sort of concept, because when it comes to theology or when it comes to an educational area, something like that, it's sort of understood. Some people might know a little more than others, but when it comes to technology, for some reason, it's like if we don't know technology, we sort of treat technology as if it's something much more, profound and prolific than say like theology or anything like that. And so I want us to sort of think as we go into this learning experience, if we are talking about technological things, just sort of reframe it from your perspective, the same way in which you sort of had went deeper into a theological degree or a financial degree or financial services or whatever your particular domain specialty might be, you're just sort of navigating the same way. So just understanding that there's space to learn. It's another technical area. I just want to encourage folks to not be afraid or wary of going into something that you've not been in before. Accessibility is this interesting thing where it involves technology. Yes, it does. But it also involves a whole lot of stuff that's not technology as well. And so as we sort of go into this conversation, I want to encourage us to understand technological, non-technological, whether you are a techie or whether you're not a techie, that these things apply to all of us in the same space. And then lastly, I have lots to learn as well. We're going to go through this in a little detail, but even in the technical space, in terms of making an accessible experience available for everyone, yes, even I have to learn things as we go. So we're all engaging this learning discipline around accessibility together. And we're coming at it from different angles, but we're all in this from a learning perspective. Okay. So it's for humans because it's for all of us, regardless of who we are. So let's just sort of start off. This is sort of a little open-ended, but I'm just curious, why does accessibility matter? And sort of wrapped up in there, there's really two things I'm asking. I'm asking what's accessibility and why does it matter for us, particularly in the context of who we are at ABHMS. This is intended to be open-ended. This is not one of those preacher things where I've got a right answer in my mind. Everything is open. What are your thoughts? And you can just open the mic and say it.
I'll open up, I'll open up my mic, Saeed. Within the context of who we are as ABHMS, I think it is an issue of justice. It's something that I have not really thought much about until our colleagues lifted this up as a priority for us, and I have begun to take closer notice at this. As ABHMS, we are intentional of looking at those on the margins to make sure that they are meaningfully included. And so I'm learning a lot, and I thank my colleagues, particularly in CCL, for lifting this up as a priority.
I'll just add, because I think a lot of us, doors are opened on justice issues through relationships. So there was a student when I worked at Hartford Seminary who was and is deaf. And through my friendship with Candace, I've really come to see that accessibility, when we focus on inclusion, it's not like, how do I get Candace there? It's actually, if I'm thinking about Candace, I'm inevitably going to create a more accessible, available, inclusive experience for everyone. So for example, I added the captions because I'm trying to remember to do that more often as a facilitator, and I don't necessarily, but it helps me to see visually what's being said as well. So I don't, to my knowledge, have any hearing issues, but it is another layer of enhancing my learning. So that sense of like, it's not just going after the person who wouldn't otherwise access it, it's actually making it as widely, layered and multimodal so that everyone learns or experiences more fully.
Awesome. Yep. Any other thoughts? Yeah.
Well, good morning, everyone. Saeed, it was so interesting. I was looking at upgrading an Apple product and this line came up. So when I saw accessibility, it reminded me that it says, the best technology works for everyone. That's why our products and services are inclusive by design with built-in accessibility features to help you connect, create, and do what you love in the ways that work best for you. So I kind of like that last part.
Awesome. Cool. So along that same vein, if you had to sort of describe for yourself a definition of accessibility, what might that definition be? I'm curious. You want to take a stab at it?
The first thing that comes to my mind is like ease of access. It's easy for me to get to, it's easy for me to use, it's easy for me to understand.
But
And
not
And
just,
when we speak about accessibility, sorry, Pete,
no
we're
worries.
also trying to think intentionally about those whose ability to access is different from what we deem to be normal for a human being. So those with hearing impairment, visual impairment, other physical or intellectual disabilities. And so thinking about, okay, this is a beautiful PowerPoint. How would somebody who can't hear access it? How would we describe the graphics for somebody who's visually impaired?
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. Pete, you're going to say something?
No, Rebecca beat me to the punch. That was exactly what I was going to say.
All right.
Well, not word for word, but
I was like, she's really good at that case. So I'm going to offer a definition, and it definitely includes, I think, everything that I'm hearing so far. So it's in the context of technology, particularly, refers to the design and implementation of websites, applications, and digital tools in a manner that makes them usable by as many people as possible, regardless of any physical or cognitive disabilities they may have. And so it sort of lifts up what Jennifer was saying a moment ago, that by as many people as possible. It's interesting. I'm glad you said it to Jennifer, because we oftentimes think of accessibility as something just for those who might be limited or beyond what we permute as normal, as Rebecca just said, but it also is of value to us as well. But in a little more English, I think it's also it's about leveling the playing field and ensuring that everybody has equal access to information, services, and opportunities. And for me, it even sort of pushes it beyond their own technology. And so we're living in a hybrid space where it's always in person and online for the most part, at every moment of engagement. And accessibility is this interesting sort of moving target that's continually shifting. I'll sort of put it out there for a moment. I mentioned this before, but if you look at the use case for Zoom, you would never see it as it's the default screen sharing utility for large groups. If I want to share my screen. But yet, that's something that we have, I don't even know if folks realize it, that we have evolved into the process of doing. And so we've evolved into the process of using Zoom as a means of making our meeting experiences level across the field. And so it's interesting, even if we're all in the same place, we have the ability to have, if the Zoom room is running, we can share our screens. We can see individually what might we also see collectively. We have the capacity to see live words and captions and transcripts and everything. We're going to take it a step further, and I'm sure Rachel wouldn't mind me mentioning this, but about 6 or 8 months ago, we were trying to figure out how do we help her hear a little better. And so, she and I sort of sat together and said, well, hey, look, you've got a pair of headphones? She's like, yeah. So why don't you just go ahead and connect your phone to the Zoom room and then listen in right there. And then now all of a sudden we have an automated hearing assisted device so that she can hear directly through her phone a louder volume with what's going on as well. And so I think accessibility in and of itself is a moving target that's really about leveling the playing field for everyone, for information services and opportunities. And so there we go. You don't have to quote me on it, but if you want to use it, hey, go ahead and do it. So there are a few considerations that we always want to keep in the forefront when we're working in this space. Now, for the context of our conversation, a lot of what we are doing, a lot of what we're going to talk about is in relation to the digital space, but just understand when I'm seeking conversation in the digital space, I'm really expanding that out. So it's not just the digital, but it is also, in the hybrid experience, the digital and in person, although we may be using a lot of digital tools to facilitate that leveling of the playing field. So the first thing, and this is something, we have been living, we just went through IDT this week. We have our all staff meetings and everything as well. From my perception, and forgive me, I'm going to sneak out here and say this, but from my perception and being here in the last 2 years, one of the things that we wanted to be intentional about is in our planning for the processes and the work that we do. And so one of the ways in which we're going to have to we're going to have to augment and continue to develop that process is to have accessibility as a planning scene on the forefront of what we do. Particularly in the technology space, when we're evaluating tools and resources, and not just folks like me, when you pick up your phone, like all honesty, like how many times have you actually picked up and utilized the accessibility features in your mobile devices? And they're all there. It's a lot of resources and everything there. So oftentimes things are there in the tools and the resources and the experiences that we have. We just haven't thought to plan with them in advance. And so we are basically unaware that they are. And so part of our shift is going to be making accessibility at the forefront of those things that we do. And so that's our events, that's our programs, our communications, the initiatives that we do as well. And I'm not going to lie, it's an extra work and everything wrapped around that, because going back to Pat's example, Apple having the statement that they have all these things in place to make equal opportunities for learning. And like, Michelle was saying earlier, having accessibility as an issue of justice, you've got to plan for those things in the beginning. So that's sort of where the second step is at. That planning involves and requires us to take seriously tools and frameworks that are in place to ensure that we're doing, I won't say the right way, but the best way. Particularly if we are not, and if we don't know people who have limitations that we're trying to provide for. And so one, we want to have people who have limitations at the table when we're making those things, but then also two, there are tools and frameworks that are out there that have been vetted as well, that if we don't necessarily have those insights, they can help us in the processes. And looked up a couple of those in the midst of this as well. And so, and the reason I say that is because our whole life this past week has been about using new tools and new frameworks for getting our work done. And I'm going to be honest, there are additional tools and frameworks that we'll have to be picking up and putting into play. And so that involves new work and new energy and new bones and new frustrations that are going to be on the table for how we go about doing this. So just putting it up there, if we're going to take serious issues of justice and leveling that playing field, we also have to take to issue the fact that it's a whole lot of work. And because it's new, that third point right there, yes, Jennifer, new intentions to plan earlier. Failure is inevitable. One of the beautiful things about being a software developer for the last 20 years of my life is that I've become comfortable with failure. I wouldn't say comfortable. I've gotten used to failure. I don't know if you ever get comfortable with it. Because inevitably something will not work right all the time. And here's the deal. And Erica, you can make a testament to this. we will oftentimes run the risk of taking the blame of doing something that we did not make happen. And so just understand that there is a learning mechanism. Now we can obviously we'll plan, we'll do our best to make sure that we're meeting the needs and the standards for the tools and our frameworks and the experiences of the people that we're working with, but also understand that it's okay. That's a part of the learning process. Messing up, not getting it right the first time or the second time, or even the third time is okay. And then complications and then new scenarios will arise over the course of time. So I want to just say that these are the things that we want to keep in the forefront as we move forward in this particular space. So I'm going to shift over into a little bit of the more specific ways in which we are engaging accessibility first. Now, as a preface to this, I don't want to ignore the fact that we have accessibility in our physical facilities. Things like our ramp in the front and the ways in which our doors open. The most recent accessibility project, I'm sure everybody knows this, the entryway to the CCL and to NPRs as well. I'm not discounting those things at all. Just for the sake of time, I'm just sort of shifting over into the technology areas as per the training session in November for the context of what we're talking about. So with that being said, I want to talk through some of the things around accessibility in our websites and accessibility of software and applications, getting at, again, what Pat said. For those who may have joined a little later, I also want to just remind you that in the team site, in the staff learning cafe, and the general sub channel, you'll see the files, and inside the files, the general files, you'll see a folder that says Training Accessibility for Humans, and you'll see both this presentation and an article that I wrote that accompanies the presentation for your knowledge. So accessibility first on our websites. And so there are a number, and these are some of the frameworks and standards that I'm talking through that makes this work legitimate and real and most impactful. So standards are put in place to ensure that we're meeting some sense of a bar in terms of how we're delivering this stuff. And I will say that these standards that you see in place and some of the frameworks here, these aren't just things that Saeed has put together. These are things that governing bodies that include people with disabilities that are more close to this issue than even I am. I've got a sister who just recently got disclosed as being fully blind, and so she's going through the process. And she's 5 years younger than me. She's now going through the process of figuring out life and career and housing and home and everything. She's been continually grading over the course of the year. And so these things, I'll just put it out there, are really important to me because we have a lot of conversations in terms of, okay, Saeed, how do I do work? How can I use a computer? How do I do all these things if I can't see? And so it's, and she's also disabled. She's an amputee, has missing one leg. I've got a brother who's also missing a foot as well. And so these things are the accessibility, I just want to put it out there. It's important to me as a brother, an older brother particularly, who's even advising his own siblings. And so these standards really come into play regarding it. And so I'm going to talk about a few of these in a moment. I'm going to talk about HTML semantic elements. I'm going to talk about accessible, rich internet applications. Internationalization, this is this I-18N thing you see on the screen. This is basically ways in which a website can be made available in multiple languages. So I can sort of click a button. You may have been at sites where it's at the top, it might be a flag, or it might be an EN or an ES, that kind of thing, and you choose your particular preference. And sometimes they don't even detect what language you're using on your computer when you get there and switch as well. These are all really important things and features. And what you may not even know behind the scene is that a lot of the resources that we've been bringing into play are also lifting up these standards as well. We just have to go through the process of enacting them. Real quick example is that you may have seen Pete and his plans for the year talking about the redesign of the ABHMS website. We actually are shifting all of our websites over into Squarespace. CCL just shifted over into Thinkific, and these are all programs that support the ability for us to have dynamic language management as a part of those things as well. And this is interesting. We're talking about accessibility. We've been talking about disability, but it's also important to understand that accessibility is not always disability. Remember, leveling the language field. So you might have people who may not have, notable disabilities, but different languages. But that language of accessibility and being able to access the information is just as important. So just note, we oftentimes want to sort of go one direction, but understand that it's a little broader than just even disability in that space. Let me just shift over. I'm going to just sort of go through a couple of now we're going to talk through, and these are not just necessarily technical frameworks again, but I want to just say we're going to lift up some of the frameworks and how they come about in making things easy to engage in the concept of accessibility. So HTML semantic elements. What in the world is that? Okay. I think this is one of the most, I tried to figure out what is the most simplistic way of sort of thinking about it. And I think this might be a way of thinking about it. The semantic elements are special labels, and they're in the background of the code that describes a particular part of a website. And the example that I have here is, imagine your website's a school backpack. For those of us who remember having backpacks and being in school. But in your backpack, you've got pockets for pencils and books and snacks. You might even have, carabiner clips that you can snap on sports equipment and things like that, extra sneakers. And you've got pockets on the inside where you can put your computer and your files and that kind of thing. And you may have a pen pocket, that kind of thing. The special labels like header and nav and div and the label, things like that, are basically a way to describe where certain things in the backpack go. So I might have imagine if my backpack just had nothing on it. It just had all the pockets, but imagine if each pocket actually had a label on it. This said drink holder, and this said eyeglass pocket, and this said computer pocket. What we're doing is we're putting labels around the backpack so that someone who's not familiar with that backpack can come into and see it. And the someone in this case, when it comes to websites, is actually things like a screen reader. So if someone cannot see, if they come to your website and then there are no labels, they have no idea what each and everything is. And so they might be using a screen reader, and the screen reader's job is to go through the site and figure out what are each one of those compartments or pockets inside of the system. And if there are no definitions that says this is an Apple pocket, or this is for my drink holder, or this is for my computer, then it's really difficult for that person who's limited in their vision to be able to use their tools to work right. So in the same way in which we make roads the best possible way for cars to transit, we want to make our website the best possible place for things like a screen reader to be able to read for the people. And as you can imagine, that can be a lot of work. Just sort of think in your mind conceptually, when you go to our ABHMS website, all the things that are there, how do we go through the process of making sure that all those things are recognizable behind the scenes for someone who's coming into that? For those who are interested, I do have a little more technical definition right there. You can look at it at your own leisure as well. And there are also standards that are wrapped around this next area. It's a ARIA or ARIA, depending on who you talk to. Accessible Rich Internet Application Standards. And so these are standards that's built on that in terms of screen readers and other assistive technologies to understand how you move through an app. And so this is sort of expanding even more in terms of having content and details around images. Some of these, I know you guys in the CCL may be familiar with. So I want to make sure that when I, think we did that experience yesterday. And thank you so much, Lauren, for doing that. But just sort of think to ourselves, how might that have been for someone who could not see their screen? And so if we were to, say before the exercise, Lauren and her team and the CCL were to think, how can we describe this image in such a way that if I couldn't see it, but I heard a description of it, that I could still participate in the intellectual, visual, or my Latin is really bad. The visual lectern divina. So think about that for a second. That's an extra step of planning that we would have sort of had to think through to make that happen. Lauren loved the exercise. Please don't think I'm saying anything bad whatsoever, okay? But
all good. It's a good point, Saeed.
so that's an example of, and then think about it. We go to spaces for grace. Think about how all of our PowerPoints and our presentations and that kind of thing. Now, again, it's a whole lot of extra work to do that. But these are the things, if taken seriously into its full fruition, that we include everybody in that experience. And so I won't go into all the details, but ARIA standards are a way in which that happens. So when it comes to things like video conferencing, and so I'll sort of isolate primarily Zoom and Teams, there's actually a lot of stuff, and that's, I think it's pretty valuable that I don't think most folks, the world really knew as much about Zoom before the pandemic as opposed to after the pandemic started. I think Zoom started around 2012. And in my particular world, I think in a lot of the community organizing world, we were using Zoom, but I didn't see it a whole lot in the corporate sort of space. But to that, the Zoom sort of forced everyone, the pandemic sort of forced everyone, including Zoom, to really take serious the concerns and the needs of accessibility in our application software. And so for the course of the last 3 years, I think we've seen a lot of really prolific tools come into play. And so a lot of these we're familiar with. The administrative services team, we had a training, I can't recall when it was. We went through some of these facilities, some of these utilities inside of Zoom. And so we've been using, I'm actually pretty proud, we've been using pretty regularly for our meetings, our captions and our transcription services. We've also, and so you know about that, if you've got live captions turned on, you will automatically also have a transcription as a part of your Zoom recording. And I'm actually at a point where I know that we have a lot of conversation on whether I should use, a tool like Otter AI. I think Zoom is doing its best to build up its internal resources, internal services to make itself the competitor, so you don't have to use a tool like Otter AI for additional processing. So there's even AI inside of the system. You may have seen the highlight features when you're looking at a recording. The feature where when I look through the transcript, I can actually see people as they're talking. I can click on someone's words and it'll take me to that place in the video. So it's good to see those things that are coming in place. There's also capacity to have external caption providers integrate in with it as well. There are video options. We don't oftentimes think about the visual interface as a way, but doing things like pinning and spotlighting. Pause right here for a second. I've actually got this backwards, forgive me. I realize I wrote it backwards. Spotlighting is for everyone in the experience. Pinning is for me in the experience. And so sometimes there might be a screen or a person, and we can sort of do more education around this. And so being able to show things as priority in the window is a big deal. And then there are also, I don't know if you've looked at, again, in the settings of Zoom. So if you ever go into your audio or your video settings, on that left-hand side down towards the bottom, you'll also see options for accessibility inside of Zoom. And you can also change things like your display settings, keyboard shortcuts, which are a big deal, particularly if you're used to, clicking things in a certain sequence, and also screen reader support that's built into Zoom too. That's a really big thing. It may even, I'm sort of thinking out loud, forgive me, I'm a verbal processor. It may even be worth us just investing in a couple screen readers just so we can sort of begin to sort of see what it might look like and see how our experiences are experienced from the outside. And then additional features I've got down there at the bottom. We don't think oftentimes, we think that dark mode is sort of like the sexy new thing that we see in a lot of user interfaces and everything, but dark mode is a really big deal. And also things like high contrast mode too. We do have a person here, and I talk pretty regularly with the person as well, who regularly uses high contrast mode for their visual engagement with the screens. And if you don't know what high contrast mode, either on your phone or your computer, go to your settings and search for high contrast mode and then turn it on. Just to see how the way in which the dynamism of how the screen shows in front of you is really important. I've got here a link right here for more resources for going into learning about Zoom accessibility. I also show it here on the screen as well. But they've got a pretty rich ecosystem in terms of questions and answers and links and everything. In the article that I provided for you as well, there's a block that goes through all the details. I can show you that as well. Let me just pull it out. So in the article I provided for you as well, there's also a pretty deep section that goes through and has links to all those particular services and utilities that are offered inside of Zoom as well. So definitely take a look at that for your pleasure too. I don't have it in the presentation, but I can send you the link for this as well. But Microsoft Teams also has a bunch of resources. There's actually a new version of Teams. I'm actually using it now. That's currently out, and so Teams has also been upping its game. I think its UI may not be as intuitive at times as Zoom might be. But if you are using Teams for your individual meetings and you do have a need, there are accessibility options very similar. I won't say they are as robust as they might be in Zoom, but they are there for you in Teams as well. So definitely take a look at those. And if we've got time, or or even later, I can sort of open up Zoom and again walk through some of those things that are there. There are a few thoughts to consider as well, and this is really important. In my life, in the technology sphere, nothing. Here's it. I want to tell you, a really good information security and IT person will never go the course of their work without having an audit somewhere in place. Think about it. If I'm going to build a car, there are systems in place to make sure that car is emissions efficient, make sure that car meets certain standards and regulations before it's able to use on the road. If I'm going to open a restaurant, there are standards and audits and clearances that I have to make sure that I'm legitimately able to serve food to people so they don't have sickness when they eat it. The same thing happens when it comes to world and the life of the internet, information systems, internet security, and software development as well. And so again, even though again, like I said, when it comes to accessibility, it's both in person and online, virtual, and in real life at the same time. There are audits and audit systems that are put in place. I've not run any of them publicly because I know that we're not equipped to handle them. I've done them in other aspects of work in different places. They are really comprehensive. But at some point in the next couple of years, to sort of see that where we are when the rubber meets the road, to make sure that we are heading in that right direction, that we will have to do some initial audits to see where we are. And it'll be surprising. The same way we did the security audits, Michelle, the year before I got here, those same things are going to come into play. It's also important to understand that there are global perspectives that come into play. And so it's not just I talked about the language and the internationalization, but there are other perspectives in terms of how we generate that information. It also gets really complicated too with language, with perception, and how we culturally see different things. Even things as simple as, reading the screen from right to left versus from left to right, and that kind of thing, depending on what language environment you're coming from. There are case studies. I'd love for at some point for us to be the proprietors of our own case studies about how people have been able to have better experiences and be able to use those to sort of tell the story. Let me just pause for a second. I'm a lover of storytelling. Many of you guys know I've been a pastor for over 20 years as well. But I very rarely hear like faith-based tech stories. And so a really deep passion of mine is to also be able to tell the story of how technology engages with faith as well in the work that we do too. And so I can see us, having case studies in terms of people using everything from ministry life to our general website in terms of how that goes into play as well. Number 4 is really hard. This is a really hard and challenging thing, is that we cannot immediately and always say yes to everything. I'm sort of, hopefully by now you've seen it's a really huge picture. It's a lot of work. There are a lot of pieces into play. At some point, when we build out a roadmap for this, and we've gotten an official accessibility planning group and team together, but as we build out a roadmap for this, just think about all of the assets that we have in person, online, and then even experientially do things like our conferences, Space for Grace, the biennial. That's an awful lot of work to make sure that we're meeting all these needs. And so, as painful as it is, as we sort of build out a roadmap, it will mean that we will not have everything in the beginning, but then also too, as we go through, we really have to think about what are those pieces of the accessibility engine that we put into place. When do they come into play? How do we go through that? Giving unlimited money, unlimited energy, and unlimited people, we can do a whole lot. But last time I checked, we don't have unlimited of any of those, and so it's a really hard play. And I remember I really appreciate it because I had a lot of these conversations with Bev, and it was hard sometimes, because we were talking about this, and I was like, so we'd have to have these conversations, almost negotiations on what we could and couldn't do in light of some of the work. And so I don't have an answer for that one. I'm just going to say it's hard as we sort of figure out what we do and what we don't do as well. And if there is an aspect of hope with this, it is in point number 5, and that really right now it's really the present of accessibility, is that there are AI tools that are sort of coming into the scene to help with this, and so we're seeing things like RAI and Zoom and things like that are helping to sort of deal with the energy and the capacity of making all this happen. But I can tell you that it's still hard work. And so even in the work that I'm doing and building out Ministry Life, there are a lot of security standards that I'm putting in place from the beginning. And we're also putting in place accessibility standards as well from the beginning too. Think of it in terms of like building a building. There's a whole lot of work that goes into the foundation before you see the walls come up. There's the electrical, there's the plumbing, there's the sanitation, the list can go on and on and on. All of those things are coming into play as well as we are navigating this life. So just know that. Yes, please.
I'm sorry, I just had a question for you. So from a strategy standpoint, and this may be for Ministry Life and CCL as well. Yesterday you talked about agile development, right? And so as you're developing, you're engaging, you're learning to make sure that it's meeting the customer need. What I don't know is, as we are looking to minister to our constituents, because I don't have anyone in my close personal sphere that has needed to make sure they have this type of accessibility in place, I'm not as close to it as some of you are. And so I don't know so we want to make sure that we're integrating accessibility into current and future offerings. How do people begin to know that ABHMS is taking this seriously, and we start actually attracting people with those needs to us? Because I would imagine that not all of our ABC partners have this as a priority. Right. And so there are people who are used to folks not having it as a priority. And so they're likely going other places to engage where they can do so meaningfully. So just from a strategy standpoint, how are we looking at gradually adding these tools, because you can't do them all at once? Yeah. And is there anything we know about our constituency and the people we're trying to reach that helps us to prioritize? If we don't do anything else, this is a must, and this is a must.
So there are two sort of there are two responses that I immediately think of, and Erica, you could feel free to jump in. The first response, and I know Pete, you don't want to hear this, but I think this is a core marketing and communications strategic concern, and so I'll sort of leave it like that. That's sort of like a huge piece, and so Erica and I have been sort of leveraging a bunch of that right now, but this is at some point, I guess it would have to be an organizational priority that things like accessibility and how we engage around the realm of our justice. Maybe it can be a part of an integration with like IT and Healing and Transforming Ministries around their justice work. I'd love to actually have that. Actually, Lisa and I had some ancillary conversations around this. So to me, the first thing is that it's definitely a marketing and engagement issue for us. The second thing is, now we haven't gotten here yet, and Erica and I have talked about this, but we're in the process of moving into this space where when we begin to identify users that are working with us in the agile process, and we've got a number of different sort of user profiles that Erica and I both put together, but making sure that accessibility, people with accessibility needs are also part of those demographic profiles, so that, and it might seem trivial at first, but even doing something, okay, we got a new feature that comes out. I've got, let me pause for a second. Let me restate that. Including people in the development process that are centered in that particular experience and getting their input. So a new feature comes out, they can test it. And then I also have on my end, I also do automated end-to-end, and I've got that listed in the previous slide, accessibility tests as well. And so basically there's another engine that I have that emulates what it's like to have a certain set of accessibility issues. And I use a little bit of AI as well to process whether or not the application can function for that particular person. So having the computer process stuff and having real people process stuff as a part of the build process moving forward.
And one of the things that we will have moving forward into the second version is we are very intentional about release notes. So when we have new features, and for us, this is going to be a new feature. And so that will be something that is front and center when we release version 2. It's one of the things that we will absolutely highlight. But then also moving forward as we continue, like Saeed said, to add things, to the platform, and we'll continue to make sure that that is front and center in those release notes.
That's actually a good point, Erica. So, and maybe Pete and I, you and I haven't had an in-depth conversation with this. We've had some meetings with Lakeisha, but we haven't had like the second round next thrust. But definitely when you guys get to the point of having more time, it's going to be worth, because we do have a lot of documentation. I do have, you guys have already seen some of the release notes I sent out a few weeks ago for everybody to see the latest release version, but we can use those resources to build on content for marketing. And also I think it's also really important to have a content marketing strategy around the pillars and the values that Ministry Life is bringing as well. And we can talk more about that too.
And I would just want to jump in and add one more thing. A huge one is language. And like Saeed mentioned, for us, that is in the foundation now. So we can't have all of them. We know some of the most predominant languages that are needed, and we will continue to add to those. But that is a huge piece that, especially given our status, I guess, as a denomination of being one that is one of the most diverse, that's a huge piece that in version 1 was just not thought of. And so in 2, we go deep into that from the beginning.
Let me just, if you don't mind, thank you, Erica, for sharing. I just want to shift and just honor some of the comments that are in the comments. Jennifer, you've got a comment about ABC USA having any work groups or committees focused on accessibility. I don't know the answer to that. Michelle, I don't know if you know the answer to that, but that might be worth, actually, 2 things. It might be worth inquiring about, but shucks, if they don't, we could even lead the way in that space. I mean, it's more work. Sorry, I don't want to volunteer. I don't want to tell anybody to do anything, but it would be good, a good space for us to sort of walk into. Rebecca, you made a comment about, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to say it would be interesting just to start a dialogue using Ministry Life as an example.
Yeah.
To just test out who has an interest in this, start a dialogue on it, even before looking to ABC USA to have a work group.
Yeah.
Generate interest, learn from people. It could be a justice dialogue, maybe, as a way to start conversations about it that then will create a groundswell to move.
Okay. So it sounds like we've got another working group. Jennifer, Rebecca, Erica, and I know that's initial. So we'll follow up and see who else might want to pull into doing more work. So there's Rebecca made a comment, stock photo agencies, definitely including captions embedded there in their images for visually impaired as well. Let's just be honest too, it's also a great selling point. People will use stuff. And here's the deal, people will use stuff if they have a need for it. But I think there's also a sense of altruism in using something that's focused on something that provides a need for people. If you don't necessarily even have that. So, people find value in lifting up something that's taking note of concerns that they don't even have. So I think that's a real point. Rebecca, it's occurring to me that this accessibility on Zoom link could be a value. Yeah, you could do that. I'll give you a link for the team site as well, Rebecca, that you can add as well. There are also benefits for those of us who have an ADHD. Definitely right there. Erica, you mentioned that as well. Yeah, so I mean everything, colors and text sizing and things like that as well. Definitely a good thing. Jennifer, you also said the audits tend to shift accessibility from a feature to an integrated value. Yes, definitely. And also see how much we don't know and how much we've missed. And both of those are critical things. Yes. Jennifer and Rebecca, you guys are on a roll here. Rebecca.
I told you I'm the chat champion.
Dr. Pat, you mentioned putting something in the press release. Okay, I think that's mostly everything. Oh, you got Jennifer, you got a friend on the UCC board. All righty. There's a last minute item before the meeting ends. Oh, sorry, that's from Ottery. All righty. Let's see. All right, so that's the gist of what I have. I do want to. Well, we've been sort of going into any questions. Are there any other questions, particularly out of people who haven't said anything? If you want to have a space to say something, definitely feel free to chime in here. Oh, you know what, Lauren, you'll appreciate this. So I've been working in user-centered design development for about the last 20 years, particularly in the areas of how that integrates with technology and user experience, so user interface and user experience as well. Also doing, before I got here in my days of working in academic medicine, I did a lot of work in agent-based simulation and modeling as well, where you simulated how people interacted in different scenarios from a design thinking perspective. I actually had an educational specialist on staff with as well. But anyway, I'll just say all that because the UI and the UX experience, the user experience, it's all centered around user focused design. And so that's everything from, like I was mentioning before, light and dark modes, responsive design, basically having things that scale with the size of the browser, depending on whether you're on a computer or a tablet or a mobile device, making sure that it integrates in. So anyway, all that stuff is sort of wrapped in there as well. Just sort of make a connection from some of the things that some other folks are doing. It's also a part of this process too. Rebecca, you have to hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to offer that last year, as part of my interest in this area, I participated in a certificate series through American Academy of Religion that was specific around designing learning experiences, syllabus, and course creation that is accessible. So that's I'm offering myself as a resource. I would have to review those materials, but as you think about planning events and leader trainings, I can offer some of the best practices that I learned there, including for in-person events.
Thanks, Rebecca.
I want to just name, Pete was noting that he's familiar with this in higher ed, where yes, it's tied to federal funding. So those of us in that context have some experience there, but recognizing that we don't have that same financial impetus, do we nevertheless desire to move in the direction of putting some sort of clause about being contacted related to accessibilities or accessibility needs, accommodation. Right now, when we host an event, we just kind of host the event. And if somebody reaches out and lets us know they have a need, then we will do our best to respond to it. But we are not necessarily, we're talking about that, like, how do we begin to do this? Beginning to put on events, contact so-and-so, and then we would need to figure out what's that internal mechanism. Is that a concierge issue? Is that a program sponsor issue, et cetera? But that is the first step to say to people, we are prepared to hear from you what you need to participate fully in this event. And I'm not aware that we do that currently unless I missed that somewhere.
I'm new to sufficiently new to ABHMS to say that I don't know definitively, but I'm not aware of it, but I think it would be a very valuable thing for us. But just the cautionary point is making sure that you have a sufficient amount of infrastructure in place so you're not left scrambling. And I think that there are some disability offices. Villanova had an excellent disability office, and I think that there are some places where we can reach out to get a sense of how we would need to equip ourselves or what kind of an infrastructure we would need to put into place, or at least make some inroads into that. So we're not, completely, reinventing the wheel. Others have gone there before us.
Yeah. The other comment that I would just make is even before, so it does require resources to be able to offer a variety of accessibility tools to folks. So even when those resources aren't in place yet, and we're not ready from an infrastructure place to offer a large menu of that, I think it is helpful. I'm imagining, and Pete and others, you can let me know if this makes sense or not. But we can show intention around this when we're having registrations to say, we are trying to gear up to be more accessible. And so if you have accessibility needs, whether we can meet them or not, we want to start gauging how many people would participate if they had this. So that way we can start gauging what's the actual need for people who are connecting with us. It signals that it's on our radar screen. We're not there to meet every need yet. When we can, we will. But that could be a starting place.
Yeah, essentially, surveying our constituencies and getting a sense as to, how big an unmet need there is out there.
In the spirit of fierce, I don't know about that approach. I absolutely appreciate the intent behind it. I'm sort of like, if you tell me you want to know that I'm out here, but you're not ready to have me be there, then come back to me when you're ready, is my first response. So I almost think separating it from events and thinking about how do we just pull generally, because if we were to begin to if I see something and I want to attend, and what you're telling me is in the future you might be able to, but not this time, that would feel almost like we're building a barrier where somebody might not necessarily experience it right now.
Yeah, no, that's really helpful. And so I leave it up to you guys to figure out the best approach. But essentially what I'm saying is that if we're able to, right, I think we do need to understand what is the need and the demand for it in our constituency. And where we can provide that, we absolutely will, but you don't want to get into a situation where you're promising something you can't deliver. So to Pete's comment, identifying partners who are currently doing this. Sometimes we don't necessarily have to have the infrastructure, but we can partner with somebody who can bring it in if we have folks who have registered and said that they need that. So I think we just need to develop a strategy around that. But the key thing is over deliver, under promise, over deliver. And as we understand the demand, then we'll be able to identify how much resources is needed to meet a felt demand.
Agreed. Thanks, Michelle.
But one thing I think that might be worth, I don't think we've done this, but it might be worth officially having an accessibility and disability committee as a part of the Space for Grace. I'm not sure if it could be underneath it. I know because we're going to be dealing with it with the hybrid team, definitely, but it might be worth having an intentional space to talk about that, because that's also going to inform how information gets marketed, communicated. There should be a number of emails that go out to folks. There should be a specific document, at least one page or so, or a guide that says what services we can offer in light of the conference. And so that's sort of one thing that's sort of bubbling in my head right now. And I'm going to, if you want to, whoever wants to be involved, but I think Erica and I will work, in the context of the hybrid team, that'd be a place to start having the conversation with us. So I guess we'll figure out how to send more information about that as well.
If I may say, you just loop me into that. Since it does have an impact on how we communicate about the event, and certainly the hotel is going to be, it's a public space, or largely a public space, so they have certain things that they have to be able to do to comply with ADA requirements and whatnot. But for us as the host of the event, if there are things that we could be doing for those who are coming in person, I'd like to know more about that too.
One thing, just for the sake of time, I know that we want to. We still got time, right?
We're actually 5 minutes over.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was right first. One thing, I don't know if you know this, but Zoom gives us the ability to be able to persist our chats beyond the meeting. You may have seen a notice when you logged in. So Zoom actually has a whole chat engine now. It's not just, think of it almost like a mini Teams, if you will. So when you open the Zoom app, you can actually see all of your chats. This chat doesn't end. So you can still persist, come back to it. Yeah,
I didn't know. I'm so happy to know.
Yeah, you may have seen a message pop up when you logged in. I'm just saying that because there's a bunch of other stuff that's coming in here. Pat and Jennifer both posted more information. I put a link to the team's accessibility site as well, in addition to my slide. So just know that you can come back to this slide. You can come back to this chat and see the information here as well. All right. If there's nothing else, thank you so much, everyone. The conversation is just getting started. Thanks for your time. Peace, love, and blessings. Enjoy the rest of your workday and have a great weekend.
Thank you, Saeed.